Got fired by my department head. For skipping a client dinner, said I was weak under pressure. My boss fired me. Then he said I was weak. Can you imagine that? After everything I'd given to that company, hey, story time. You are not going to believe what happened to me. I'm still reeling, honestly. I was fired. For skipping a client dinner. Sounds simple, right? Like a minor infraction? Wrong. So wrong. My boss, Richard the Snake, used it as an excuse. A flimsy, pathetic excuse. But the real reason? That's a story for another time. And trust me, you are going to want to hear it. It involves corporate greed, a cover-up so deep it makes Watergate look like a leaky faucet, and caught my husband's cousin. Yeah, you read that right. My own family. This isn't just a story about getting fired. It's about betrayal, lies, and the lengths people will go to for power. What would you do if you discovered your entire career was built on a foundation of lies, orchestrated by the people you trusted most? Stay tuned, because I'm about to tell you exactly what I did. The rain was coming down in sheets that night, blurring the lights of Philadelphia into hazy halos. I should have been at the Palm, schmoozing some potential investors with Richard, my department head. Instead, I was sitting beside my mother's hospital bed, holding her hand. She'd had a stroke a week before, and the doctors were still unsure about the extent of the damage. The client dinner was important, yes, but Mom, she needed me. What else was I supposed to do? Honey, you should be at that dinner, she'd mumbled. Her words slurred. Don't let me ruin your career. Ruin my career? That thought alone made my blood run cold. How could anyone consider my mother's well-being an impediment to my professional life? Mom, you're more important than any job, I told her, squeezing her hand. I meant it. Every single word. His face was tight, his eyes cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. He didn't even offer me a seat. I need to talk to you about last night, he began, his voice dripping with disapproval. Your absence was noted. Very noted. My mother had a stroke, Richard, I explained. Trying to keep my voice level, I needed to be with her. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. While I sympathize with your personal situation, professionalism is paramount here. This company expects its employees to be reliable, to be present. Skipping a client dinner of that magnitude, it shows a lack of commitment, a lack of strength. Strength, I repeated, incredulous. Being there for my mother shows weakness? Is that what you're saying? It shows you can't handle the pressure, he said, his eyes unwavering. And frankly, in this industry, weakness is a liability. The conversation went downhill from there. Accusations flew, defenses crumbled, and then the bomb. I'm afraid I have no choice but to let you go, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, effective immediately. Fired, just like that. After 5 years of dedicated service, countless late nights, and a stellar track record, I was fired for being a human being, for choosing my mother over a steak dinner. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. But what was even worse, he said I was weak. Weak. Could you believe that? I walked out of his office, numb. The fluorescent lights of the office seemed to mock me, buzzing with an almost gleeful energy. I packed my belongings into a cardboard box, feeling the weight of each object. A framed photo of my wedding, a silly stress ball, a handwritten thank you note from a satisfied client. Like a lead weight in my chest, this was it. It was over. Or so I thought. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. That night, after putting Mom to bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying the conversation with Richard over and over again. Something didn't sit right. His explanation felt forced, too quick, too clean. And then it hit me. Why was he so desperate to get rid of me? I remembered a conversation I'd overheard a few weeks before, Richard talking in hushed tones on his phone. Something about a merger, something about burying the evidence. What evidence? I hadn't paid much attention at the time, chalking it up to typical corporate jargon. But now, it felt different, suspicious. I tossed and turned, my mind piecing together fragments of information. Whispers in the hallway, glances exchanged behind closed doors. Could it be that I was fired not because I missed a dinner, but because I knew too much? I started with the company's internal database. I had access, at least for a few more days. I knew Richard had been pushing hard for this merger, and I knew he had been taking more and more personal calls late into the night. I figured his emails would show something, but I couldn't access them. I didn't have the credentials. What could I do? That's when I thought of Michael, my husband's cousin. He worked in the IT department, a quiet, unassuming guy who knew everything about computers and networks. I hadn't talked to him in months, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I swallowed my pride and dialed his number. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Michael, it's protagonist's name," I said, trying to sound cheerful, even though my stomach was churning with anxiety. "Hey, protagonist's name, long time no see. What's up?" I took a deep breath. "Look, I know this is a big ask, and I wouldn't bother you if it wasn't important. I was recently let go from the company, and I think something fishy is going on, something related to the upcoming merger." He was quiet for a moment. "Fishy how?" "I can't really get into it over the phone, but I need access to some internal emails, specifically Richard's." There was another long pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "I don't know, protagonist's name," he said. That's a pretty big risk. If I get caught..." I know, but please, Michael. This could expose some serious wrongdoing. It could save the company from making a huge mistake." I laid it on thick, appealing to his sense of justice. He hesitated for a few more minutes, then, "All right, fine," he said. "I'll see what I can do. But you owe me big time." "Thank you, Michael. You're a lifesaver," I exclaimed, relief flooding through me. He told me to meet him at a coffee shop near his office the following day. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. My chance to uncover the truth. But what if Michael got caught? What if I was wrong? What if I was chasing a ghost? Michael was already there, sitting at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked nervous, glancing around the room as if expecting someone to jump out at any moment. "Hey," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. "Thanks for doing this." He nodded, pushing a USB drive across the table. "Here, it's all there. Be careful with it." "What exactly am I looking for?" "Client complaints," he said, his voice low. I heard Richard talking to someone about cleaning up the records before the merger, deleting some serious complaints. You should look for any deleted files. I grabbed the USB drive, my hands trembling. Deleted files? How will I find them? There are programs that can recover deleted data. Google it. Just be careful. Don't let anyone see you. I nodded, slipping the USB drive into my purse. "Thanks again, Michael. I really appreciate it." "Just be careful," he repeated, his eyes filled with concern. "And don't mention my name, okay? If anyone asks, you got the information somewhere else." I promised I wouldn't and left the coffee shop, my mind racing. I had the data. Now all I had to do was find the truth. But the weight of responsibility was crushing me. What if I found something that would ruin lives? Was I prepared to expose Richard, even if it meant hurting innocent people in the process? That night, I spent hours poring over the data on the USB drive. The files were a mess, a jumbled collection of emails, spreadsheets, and documents. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But I was determined. I had to know the truth. I downloaded a data recovery program and ran it on the USB drive. It took hours, but most of them were trivial. Old memos, drafts of presentations, personal emails. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. A folder labeled Client Feedback Confidential. Inside, there were dozens of documents, each one detailing a serious complaint from a client. Complaints about faulty products, missed deadlines, and even outright fraud. And delete. It was all there, in black and white. Richard was systematically burying client complaints to make the company look better before the merger. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was worse than I could have imagined. He wasn't just covering up minor mistakes. He was actively deceiving investors and putting people at risk. And I was the one who had stumbled upon his secret. But there was more. I scrolled further down the list of recovered files and found a hidden folder labeled compensation. Inside was an Excel sheet showing significant bonuses Richard would receive upon the successful completion of the merger. The bigger the valuation, the bigger his bonus. It all made sense now. He wasn't just protecting the company. He was protecting his own personal gain. He was willing to sacrifice everything, including his integrity and the well-being of his clients, for a bigger paycheck. I sat back in my chair, stunned. What would you do in my shoes? Expose him, stay silent, protect myself? I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss. I knew that exposing Richard would have serious consequences. It could ruin his career, his reputation, his life. But staying silent would make me complicit in his deception. It would mean allowing him to get away with his crimes. I wrestled with my conscience for hours, weighing the pros and cons. I couldn't stay silent. I had a moral obligation to expose the truth, no matter the cost. But how? Who would believe me? I was just a fired employee, armed with a USB drive full of potentially incriminating evidence. I needed proof. I needed something more concrete. I decided to go back to the office. I knew it was risky, but I had to take a chance. I needed to find something that would corroborate my story, something that would convince the investors that Richard was a fraud. I waited until late at night when the office was deserted. I snuck in through a back entrance using my old key card. The office was eerily silent, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights. I made my way to Richard's office, my heart pounding in my chest. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. I started searching his desk, rifling through files and documents. I found nothing. He was too careful. He must have moved all the incriminating evidence to a secure location. Defeated, I was about to give up when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A small, almost invisible crack in the wall behind his desk. Curious, I pushed against the wall and felt it give way. It was a hidden compartment. Inside, there was a small safe. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I needed the combination. Frustrated, I paced the room, racking my brain for a solution. Where would he hide the combination? Then I saw it. A framed photo on his desk, a picture of him and his wife. On the back of the photo, a small piece of paper was taped. I peeled it off and saw a series of numbers. It was the combination. I entered the combination into the safe and heard a click. I opened the door and gasped. Inside, there were stacks of documents, all neatly organized. And on top of the stack, a folder labeled Merger Confidential. I grabbed the folder and started flipping through the documents. It was all there. Detailed reports on the company's finances, projections for future growth, and most importantly, evidence of the deleted client complaints. Richard had kept a copy of everything just in case. I also found emails printed out, correspondence between him and the company set to do the merger, talking about cutting me out of the final presentation. They knew. I felt a surge of triumph. I had the proof I needed. But then I noticed something else in the safe. A small velvet box. I opened it and saw a diamond ring. An engagement ring. It was beautiful, but what was it doing in Richard's safe? Then it hit me. Richard was having an affair. And not just any affair. He was having an affair with someone at the company, but who? I remembered a conversation I'd overheard between two of my colleagues a few weeks before. They were gossiping about Richard and a woman named Sarah, the head of marketing. They said they'd seen them having dinner together, holding hands across the table. Sarah, she was ambitious, ruthless, and completely smitten with Richard. She would do anything for him, including helping him cover up his crimes. Could I use this information to my advantage? Could I expose their affair and use it to pressure Richard into confessing? As I was contemplating my footsteps, someone was coming. I quickly stuffed the documents back into the safe, closed the door, and replaced the photo on the desk. Then I hid behind the door, holding my breath. The door creaked open, and Richard walked in. He looked surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "I could ask you the same question," I said, trying to sound confident, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. "I have every right to be here. This is my office." "And I have every right to be here too," I retorted. "I still work here, at least for a few more days." He glared at me, his eyes narrowed. "I thought I made it clear that your services were no longer required." "You did," I said. "But I had some unfinished business to take care of." "What kind of business?" he asked, his voice suspicious. "The kind of business that involves exposing your lies and deception," I said, stepping out from behind the door. His face paled. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the client complaints," I said. "I know you've been deleting them to make the company look better before the merger. I know about the bonuses you'll receive if the merger goes through." He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. "I have proof," I continued. "I have copies of the deleted files. I have emails that implicate you in the cover-up." He took a step towards me, his fists clenched. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," I said. "I'm not afraid of you, Richard. I'm not afraid of what you can do to me." He lunged at me, grabbing my arm. "Give me the files," he snarled. "Give them to me now." I struggled to break free, but he was too strong. He dragged me towards the safe, trying to force me to open it. "Let go of me," I screamed. Just then, the door burst open and Sarah rushed in. She looked panicked. "Richard, what's going on?" she asked. He ignored her, continuing to struggle with me. "Sarah, help me!" I cried. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward and grabbed Richard's arm. "Richard, stop it. You're going to get us both in trouble." "What are you doing? She knows everything. She's going to ruin us." "I know," Sarah said. "But violence isn't the answer. We need to think about this rationally." "Rationally," Richard scoffed. "There's no time for rationality. We need to silence her before she exposes us to the investors." "We're not going to silence anyone," Sarah said firmly. "We're going to come clean. We're going to tell the truth." Richard stared at her in disbelief. "Are you crazy? We'll lose everything." "Maybe," Sarah said, "but at least we'll have our integrity." She turned to me, her eyes filled with remorse. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know this doesn't excuse what we did, but I hope you can understand. We were desperate. We made a mistake." I looked at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Was she telling the truth? Was she really willing to come clean? "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, "but I appreciate your honesty." She nodded, then turned back to Richard. "We need to go to the investors," she said. "We need to tell them everything." Richard hesitated for a moment, then, "All right," he said. "Let's do it." The woe. They admitted to deleting the client complaints and manipulating the company's finances. The merger was called off, and Richard and Sarah were both fired. But what about me? What happened to my job? Surprisingly, the investors were impressed by my honesty and integrity. They offered me my old job back, with a promotion, and they also offered me a substantial bonus. I accepted the offer, but with a few conditions. I demanded that the company implement stricter ethical guidelines, and that they prioritize the needs of their clients over profits. They agreed to my demands. I went back to work, feeling a sense of satisfaction and vindication. I had exposed the truth, and I had been rewarded for it. But the story doesn't end there. Remember Michael, my husband's cousin, the IT guy who gave me the USB drive? Well, it turned out that he had been working with Richard all along. He had been paid to delete the client complaints in the first place. I felt betrayed. How could Michael do this to me? How could he betray his own family? I confronted him, demanding an explanation. He confessed that he had been struggling financially and that Richard had offered him a large sum of money to delete the files. He said he regretted his actions, but it was too late. I was furious. I wanted to report him to the authorities, but my husband begged me not to. He said it would ruin Michael's life. I was torn. On the one hand, Michael deserved to be punished for his crimes. On the other hand, he was family, and I didn't want to cause any more pain for my husband. I wrestled with my conscience for days, trying to decide what to do. I wouldn't report him to the authorities, but I would make sure that he paid for his actions in other ways. I told my husband that Michael had to leave the family. He couldn't be a part of our lives anymore. My husband agreed. He was just as disgusted by Michael's actions as I was. We cut off all contact with Michael. We never spoke to him again. He became a ghost in our lives, a reminder of the betrayal and deception that had almost destroyed me. As for Richard, he moved to another city and started a new life. I heard that he was working at a small, struggling company, trying to rebuild his reputation. I never saw him again. But I often think about him and Sarah, wondering if they ever regret their actions, wondering if they ever learned their lesson. My mother eventually recovered from her stroke, but she never fully regained her mobility. She still needs help with everyday tasks, but she's happy and healthy. And that's all that matters to me. This whole ordeal changed me. It made me stronger, more resilient, and more determined to stand up for what's right. It taught me that you can't always trust the people you think you know, and that sometimes the biggest betrayals come from those closest to you. What would you have done differently? Would you have forgiven Michael? Would you have taken revenge on Richard? Would you have stayed silent, protecting yourself at all costs? It's a difficult question, and there's no easy answer. But I hope that my story has inspired you to think about your own values and to consider what you would do in a similar situation. As for me, I'm proud of the choices I made. I stood up for what I believed in, and I came out on top. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. A few years have passed now. The company, under new leadership, is thriving. I've learned a lot. Forgiveness is not forgetting. I chose to let go of the anger, the hatred, but I would never let what happened fade from my memory. It was a lesson learned in the harshest of classrooms. And strangely, it made me a better person. I still think about Richard and Sarah from time to time. I don't hate them. I almost feel sorry for them. They made a choice, a terrible one, and they had to live with the consequences. I'm now in a position to mentor other young professionals and instill ethical values, and I always tell my story. The best revenge is success. I'm not talking about monetary success, although I am very comfortable. I am talking about inner peace. Knowing that you did the right thing, even when it was the most difficult thing to do. Knowing that you emerged from the darkness stronger and wiser. So, what did you think? A wild ride, right? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have exposed your husband's cousin, or would you have protected your family? Let me know. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, redemption, and workplace drama. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. But there's another layer to this whole mess, something I've been hesitant to even admit to myself. It involves my husband, Mark. He was always so supportive, so understanding during that awful period. Or so I thought. Looking back, there were inconsistencies, little things I dismissed at the time as stress, or just Mark being Mark, like how he seemed almost too calm when I told him I'd been fired. He chalked it up to me being dramatic, but I still feel it. And his unusual interest in my case against Richard, asking questions that seemed less about concern and more about information gathering. I remember one night, sitting at the kitchen table, papers scattered everywhere as I prepared my case. Mark came in, ostensibly to bring me a cup of tea. "So," he said casually, "did you find anything interesting in Richard's emails?" I told him about the deleted client complaints, about the bonuses Richard stood to gain. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "That's pretty damning," he said. "What do you think you're going to do with it?" I told him my plan to go to the investors to expose Richard's crimes. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he simply said, "Be careful." At the time, I thought he was just worried about me. Now, I wonder, was he warning me? Or was he warning Richard? The other thing that bothered me was his relationship with Michael. They'd always been close, practically brothers. But after the scandal broke, Mark seemed evasive whenever I brought up Michael's name. He would change the subject or claim he hadn't seen him in weeks. And then one evening, I found a text message on his phone. It was from Michael. It read, "Did she find out?" My blood ran cold. Did she find out? Find out what? What was Mark hiding? I confronted him, of course. I showed him the text message and demanded an explanation. He stammered, hesitated, and then he said he'd begged Michael not to do it, that he was ashamed of his cousin's actions, but he'd never told me. He'd kept it a secret, protecting Michael at my expense. I felt betrayed all over again. My own husband, the man I trusted more than anyone in the world, had lied to me, had concealed information that could have changed everything. How could I forgive him? How could I trust him again? I needed space to think, to process everything that had happened. I packed a bag and drove to my sister's house in the suburbs. Sarah had always been my rock, my confidant. I knew I could count on her to listen without judgment. I told her everything, from the firing to the cover-up to Mark's betrayal. She listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern. When I finished, she took my hand and squeezed it tightly. "I'm so sorry," she said. "You've been through so much." "I don't know what to do," I confessed, tears welling up in my eyes. "I feel like my whole life is a lie. I don't know who to trust anymore." "You can trust me," she said, "and you can trust yourself. You're strong, you're smart, and you're capable of handling anything that comes your way." I smiled weakly. "Thanks, Sarah. I needed to hear that. It was exactly what I needed to clear my head and regain my perspective. One afternoon, while we were going through old family photos, I stumbled upon something that made me pause. A picture of Mark and Richard standing side by side at a company picnic. They looked relaxed, comfortable, like old friends. But something about the picture felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I had a nagging feeling that there was more to their relationship than met the eye. I asked Sarah if she knew how Mark and Richard had met. She said they'd known each other since high school, but the photograph, that knowing smile that Mark threw Richard's way, made me feel ill. The thought nagged at me that something was not above board. Back home, I decided to dig deeper into Mark's past. I started searching online, looking for any connection between him and Richard. I found something. An old newspaper article about a real estate deal. It turned out that Mark and Richard had been partners in a small property development company years ago. The company had gone bankrupt after a series of bad investments. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Was this why Mark had been so keen on my case? Had he just been watching his old friend? I decided to visit one of Mark's old friends, someone who knew him before I did. His name was David, and he'd been Mark's roommate in college. I found him through social media and sent him a message. He was happy to meet me for coffee. I told him I was researching a story about Mark, and I wanted to know more about his past. David was forthcoming, sharing anecdotes about Mark's college days. But when I asked about his business partnership with Richard, he became evasive. "That was a long time ago," he said. "It wasn't a big deal." "But what happened?" I pressed. "Why did the company go bankrupt?" David hesitated. "Let's just say that things went sour," he said. "There was some disagreement about how to manage the finances." Disagreement? What kind of disagreement? He wouldn't tell me, but I could tell that he knew more than he was letting on. I left the coffee shop feeling frustrated and confused. What was Mark hiding, and why were people so reluctant to talk about his past? It contained a single sentence. Follow the money. Follow the money. What did that mean? I thought about Mark's past, about his failed business venture with Richard. Could it be that they were still involved in some kind of shady dealings? I decided to investigate Mark's finances. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but I felt like I had no choice. I needed to know the truth. I waited until he was asleep. Then I sneaked into his office and started searching his computer. I found his online banking information and logged in. My eyes widened in shock. Mark had a secret bank account, and it contained a large sum of money, more than I could have ever imagined. Where did this money come from? I checked the transaction history. There were regular deposits from an unknown source, and there were also several large withdrawals, all made around the time that Richard had fired me. Could it be that Richard had paid Mark to keep me quiet? Had my own husband betrayed me for money? I felt like my world was collapsing around me. How could this be happening? How could the man I loved do something so horrible? It all made sense now. Mark's calmness, his evasiveness, his secret bank account. It all pointed to one thing. He was involved in Richard's scheme. But to what extent? Was he just a pawn, or was he a willing participant? I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, tears streaming down my face. I needed to get away from Mark, to escape the lies and betrayal that had consumed my life. What would you do in my place? What would you do if you discovered that your husband had betrayed you? Could you ever forgive him? Could you ever trust him again? I don't know the answer to those questions. I only know that I needed to find the truth, no matter the cost. I drove to a nearby motel and checked in. I spent the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of my relationship with Mark, searching for clues, for signs that I had missed. I woke up but I knew that I couldn't give up. I had to keep fighting. I had to find out the truth. I decided to confront Mark. I called him on his cell phone. He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I need to see you," I said. "We need to talk." "What's going on?" he asked. "I'll tell you when I see you," I said. "Meet me at the park in an hour." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. It was time to face Mark and demand answers. I arrived at the park early and waited for him. He showed up a few minutes later, looking anxious and disheveled. "What's going on?" he asked again. I took a deep breath. "I know about the secret bank account," I said. "I know about the money. I know about everything." His face paled. He didn't say anything. "I want to know the truth," I said. "Tell me everything. Now." He hesitated for a moment, then he confessed that Richard had approached him months ago, offering him a large sum of money to keep me quiet. He said he'd initially refused, but Richard had pressured him, threatening to reveal his past financial troubles. He claimed he'd never directly helped Richard, never actively tried to sabotage me. He'd just kept quiet. "I was afraid," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to ruin our lives." "But you did," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You lied to me. You betrayed me."